is, well, it's still October actually, and this is the second book review I'm doing for the month, October 2024. And that is because I finished this book in like record time because it was just so good. So this is Young, Damned and Fair by Gareth Russell. And this book is a biography of the Tudor Queen, Catherine Howard. So she was the fifth wife of Edward VIII. So Edward VIII is the king who had 6 wives. And Catherine Howard was the fifth wife. And by the time Edward married her, he was much older and unhealthy and overweight and probably not very attractive person to the young, very young Catherine Howard. But Henry seemed to be completely besotted with her, and she was left with no real choice really other than to marry him. So the sort of reputation of Catherine Howard. So what, I don't know how much you know about the history of the Tudors and Henry VIII and his 6 wives. It's actually really, really interesting. I love the Tudors. So Henry VIII. So this is 1500s, early 1500s. He was king. And he had 6 wives. So he was originally married to Catherine of Aragon, who was Spanish, and had also been sort of married for a short while to Henry's older brother, who had died. And then Henry was happy to marry her. They were actually quite happily married by all accounts for a long time. However, they didn't have any living sons, and Henry was quite keen on the idea of having a son. So anyway, so he fell in love with Anne. So I guess he was like 30s by then, and wanted to divorce Catherine and marry Anne. He needed permission from the Pope in Rome, because they were Catholic at the time, to divorce Catherine. The Pope wouldn't give permission. Catherine wouldn't go along with his plans. And after a lot of sort of wrangling and everything, eventually Henry VIII actually broke from the Catholic Church and started the Church of England. Then he could divorce Catherine and marry Anne. He became disillusioned with Anne quite quickly, and she was eventually beheaded for adultery. I'm going off on a right tangent on all the wives now. Anyway, then he married Jane Seymour and had a son, and he was very happy, but she died quite shortly after giving birth. And then he married Anne of Cleves, which was an arranged marriage, and he wasn't very interested in her, didn't really like her. And then he met Catherine Howard and sort of fell head over heels in love with her. So he divorced Anne of Cleves, who seems to have taken it quite graciously, and married Catherine Howard. So at this stage, he was sort of getting on to an old man. He had an injury, which meant he wasn't as active as he had been, and he was quite unhealthy by this point. So yeah, probably not a great love match on her part. And then she is also beheaded for adultery, and he later marries Catherine Parr, who he's married to for a few years before he dies. So that's his sort of brief history of Henry VIII's wives. And Catherine Howard is probably one of the more forgotten wives. She's not, the main wife or the second wife that got him to break from the church, or the one that gave him his son. She's just sort of a young woman in court. She was a lady in waiting for his previous wife, Anne of Cleves. So she was very young, and she was found guilty of adultery. And there's lots of sort of salacious stories surrounding her and her upbringing. So this book goes in a lot more depth about her, and it was just so interesting, and it was very, very well written. So although it's a historical book, it was really, really readable, like a really good fiction would be. And he gives some background information as well about other things at the time, so such as Catherine's family. So she's from a really, really good family in sort of aristocracy terms. So the Howard family are these sort of Duke of Norfolk family. So she's from really good stock, and it actually turns out she's actually related to Anne Boleyn. I think they're like second, third cousin, something like that. Not that she may well have known her at all, other than knowing that she was the queen for a while. Anyway, so this gives a much fuller picture of Catherine and where she comes from, and her sort of really meteoric rise in court, becoming the Queen of England in a very, very short space of time, and then her catastrophic fall. It's not even much longer. It's like a year and a half, 2 years later that she's beheaded and it's all over. So it's actually quite a tragic story as well, because she was really a young girl, and it seems that far from being salacious and trying to seduce him and pull him into this relationship for the advancement of her family and herself, it seems probably more that although she did love being in court, and she was probably quite sort of girly in terms of liking, gifts and clothes and all those sorts of things, it doesn't seem like she was actually looking for this relationship at all, and presented with it probably felt that she couldn't really refuse it. And it looks as well that she did try to have a good go at being a queen and being a good queen consort to Henry. It seems that she did have other people who she liked though. So it seems probable that she had slept with at least one person before she met Henry, and she was very keen on somebody else when she was married to him. And I suppose if you think of it in terms of she's a young woman, who enjoys things, she's attractive, she gets attention and things like that, and she has, sort of love affairs and relationships, whilst also being caught up in the drama of the world that is Henry VIII. And at this stage in his life, he's become quite tyrannical. So I think Henry VIII, he's really like a king of two kings, because although he was always quite sort of indulgent and wanting to do his own thing, when he was younger, I think he could probably get away with it because he was more sort of charming and attractive and athletic and more of a leader. Whereas later on, he's really lost that side of it, but kept the sort of demanding and tyrannical side. So it was really, really interesting. I really thought the book was excellently read, in a similar way to the book I read recently about Marie Antoinette, where it's giving you all this amazing history, but it's written in a way that's just very readable, easy to understand and get to grips with, and is like following an exciting story. I think I actually enjoyed this one more than the Marie Antoinette one, maybe because I knew more about the characters involved. So I felt like I could really be in that world reading it. So the Tudors are very, very interesting anyway. They're a really exciting period of English history where you've got a real sort of flourishing of art and clothes and the sort of court and things like that. And there's some very interesting characters there. So obviously you've just mentioned Henry VIII, who had the 6 wives and who broke from Rome and started the Church of England. You've also got his daughter Elizabeth I, who's just, a monumental figure in English history, was an incredible monarch. So they're really interesting anyway, and I really enjoyed reading about them and finding out more about them. This book was also really good for opening up more for my knowledge about the sort of social norms of the time, what was acceptable. There's a lot in that about the sort of behaviour that was expected of Catherine when she was in different situations, and other people as well. So it was really, really interesting. It was interesting finding out about the Howards and other aristocratic families, finding out a bit more background information about them, because they're very, very important to the royal story as well. And there's also a lot of intermarrying. One thing that really shone out from the book was how many people were remarried, often because there was a lot of death at the time, either from going off to wars or the diseases and things like that. So it was really interesting how many people were on their second or third spouse, and you've got real sort of blended families of different children from different partners. But most of all, it was really interesting to find out more about Catherine, and actually get to know her as a woman. Unfortunately, there's really hardly any actual data about who she is, paperwork and things like that, and they can't even be sure on any of the pictures of her that they are really her. And because she was the queen for such a short time, either there wasn't time to produce a lot of things about her and physical images about her, or they were destroyed afterwards because Henry felt very humiliated by the fact that his wife was sort of dallying around with other men behind his back. So there's really very little information about her, and they don't even know the year that she was born, let alone her actual specific date of birth. But Russell does say that at the time that she eventually was beheaded for adultery and treason, that she was probably aged under 21. So that's really, quite tragic, really, and sad. Other points of interest was finding out about the different castles and palaces and houses that Henry had. I love all that stuff. So they've got maps in here of so they've got some good family trees to help you get a grip of people, and then there's also maps of where the palaces are that he's talking about, because Henry didn't sort of live in one palace. He really travelled around a lot, mainly around the Thames, but it was really, really interesting to get a bit. And there's lots of place names that I know, or big sort of buildings that I know of now, which are not in the Tudor style, but to get a bit more background information about them when they were built. Russell talks about how Henry really did extensive building work in his reign. He was interested in building things and was always commissioning new things and making adjustments. However, most of them were very poorly constructed because they were finished hastily, because he was sort of on to the next project or changing his mind about things, or people were worried that if they didn't get stuff done straight away, or they came to him with problems, that they might be chopped from the job. So that was really interesting learning about that. I've got one quote about that. So it says, the royal household's accounts are littered with overtime payments to workmen who toiled through the night once the king had decided that he would be inspecting his latest renovation in a few days, weeks, if not months before he should have. Under pressure from the king, the decoration of the palaces was perfected at the cost of their longevity, and the workmanship in most of Henry VIII's homes was in fact slipshod, rushed and insufficient, which is why so few of them managed to last more than a century. Okay, it's really interesting to get all that background information of the sort of mood of the time and things. And he even talks about like some of the weather of the time. So like when the summer that Henry married Catherine, it was a really hot summer. There was sort of almost like a drought in London, and it was also when Thomas Cromwell was getting beheaded as well. And it's just the whole mood of the whole place. So it was really, really good. So my overall opinion, I absolutely loved this book. So much so that I'm reading another book about the Tudors now. I'd also definitely read more books by Gareth Russell, because it was beautifully written, really just easy to read, and just felt like you were there and could absorb loads of information, and you also had the mood of a fiction. So it's really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Also, want to give a shout out to the library, because I got that from the library. I'll be taking it back soon. It's really great to be able to use that resource. The book that I'm reading now, so another book about the Tudors, is The Private Life of the Tudors, which is by Tracy Borman. And that again is obviously going into in-depth behind the scenes. And I'm really enjoying that as well. I'm absolutely racing through that too. So I'll be back to give a review of that when that's finished. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.